Nick, thanks so much for being here. It's a real honor to have you as the first ever guest for the Impact Community Podcast. You're an impact ambassador. You're the co-founder of Stay Unbounded. You're so many things, but mostly you're a great human being, awesome leader.
If you're going to do something, you do it with excellence. The only way I can do that is if I say yes to the things that I truly care about and no to the things I don't.
Resilience is part of being an entrepreneur. I read something that you wrote saying resilience is more about becoming than returning.
Life moves fast and time is the greatest asset. You got to make the most of
it. Thank you for being here today as our first guest.
Too kind. Thanks for having me. Yeah, really appreciate it. And couldn't be more excited for the opportunity.
I'm going to maybe throw a curveball at you here. I got to pick up my paper to read a quote. This is going back to your grade 12 high school yearbook. A T.S. Eliot, Little Giddings, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Tell me about this quote. Where were you at in grade 12 to come up with this? And, give me that story.
Great deep dive there. That was
I
good.
thought it'd be a curveball.
Yeah, you know what? It is and it isn't. I stumbled across. I was back home in Ottawa at my folks' place, like maybe a few months ago, and just happened across my actual graduation album, and saw that again. And I had the opportunity to think about, I'm sure what you're asking me right now, which is like, what does that mean to me, and like trying to put myself in that grade 12's shoes. It actually makes me feel like really proud of who I was then, without probably ever feeling that way at the time. That there was obviously something in that kid that was able to recognize that like everything we're doing, we already are there. What we're seeking, we already possess. All this adventure and drive we have is only to come back to exactly where we are now with new appreciation for what was always there. And that's a theme in my life where I see it play out through my 20s, through my 30s, now into my recent 40s. We're always trying to get to a place, trying to accomplish a thing. And inevitably, it's to arrive back to exactly where we were, but only with the knowledge and the wisdom that we needed to go through that journey to be able to appreciate what we already have. You know this all too well. Like, I broke my hip, tore my glute, just over 10 weeks ago. And when that happened, I was sitting in the hospital bed, and a few days in, I realized that what that injury had given me was something I had been seeking all along, which was to just spend time with people I love peacefully in good health. And everything I do in my life is to try and get to that end. And yet I already had all of that there for me. It just took me injuring myself to stop and realize that I had what I needed. So that's a nice deep dive into like, a theme for me has been to try and realize that I already possess what I need, and I'm already where I need to go.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was pretty blown away when I read that quote you wrote. I'd be embarrassed to see what mine was in grade 12, but I will try to go back and find it. And it's probably going to be about playing sports and partying, but hopefully there's something there that I can't quite remember. So Nick, this conversation, I'm going to use the Impact Kitchen core values of passion and purpose, impact the community, and build for the future to kind of guide our conversation. And, from passion and purpose perspective, I could give some easy ones for you from nature to community to health and wellness. But when you think of passion and purpose for yourself, what do you think of, and kind of how did those pillars arise for you?
Yeah, good question. Passion for me is something that I think I I try to do and imbue into everything that I have in my life. Like if you're going to do something, you do it with excellence. If you're going to get up in the morning and complete a task, go see someone, try and build a business, build a community, it's already ingrained in me that you're going to do that with passion. And the only way I can do that is if I say yes to the things that I truly care about and no to the things I don't. If I'm not passionate about something, I'm not willing to do it, because I know that I'm only going to be half in that. So everything I do with passion is simply because that's something I truly care about. And purpose, I'd say I'm still probably trying to find my purpose, like my bigger purpose. But I think the purpose is less of like a noun of what you're trying to, like my purpose is to build communities or, be a father or something like that. Like I think purpose is more about how you approach or what your intention is around things. And so purpose, I think, is more of like a verb. And that's how I've implemented into my life, is that when I'm doing something similar to passion, I'm doing it with purpose. The act is purpose, not the end.
Yeah, I agree. When I think of passion and purpose, I use them more so as like a guiding principle, like a higher level feeling to how I want to live my life. Now, if I went a little more micro and I said to you, okay, Nick, like what's important to you? Like if you had to pick, 3 to 5 areas in your life, where I could say specifically like what's important to you. Like,
Sure.
Have you done that work, or like what comes up when I ask you that question?
Yeah. Community. And I think what I would put within community would be family, partner, future family of my own, friends, that social knit structure. I think that's everything for me. Health, and also what that all encompasses. So, a big proponent of recovery, working out. I've been a gym rat my whole life. Certainly nature. I know that's an easy one, but that's where I grew up. That's where I've spent all my time. Everything comes back to nature. Those are the top 3: community, health, and nature.
Those are great. I love the mindset of, show me your calendar and I'll show you your priorities, or show you your values. For those pillars that you have, how do you hold yourself accountable to leading your life according to those pillars? Do you have any strategies you put in place? People in your life that hold you accountable? But I know that those are very important to you. But if I challenged you and you showed me your calendar and those weren't in there, I could say, okay, well, are they actually important to you? So how do you go about, prioritizing those?
Yeah, I mean, the calendar probably wouldn't lie. I'm pretty good at blocking off time in each of those categories, but I'd say even on a more macro level, if I take nature, for example, like I've moved outside of cities and into rural settings so that not only do I have to block time, I already exist in nature. Like my life, for me, I either am living at home up in Northern Ontario, or I'm out at the cottage in the Thousand Islands in Ontario. Like my routine is already baked into nature. And so I've taken a more macro approach to that value in my life and made it so that it's a non-negotiable without me even having to schedule it. Community, similarly, I've structured work around people I love and care about. I work with and I hire onto my team, and my partner and I are business partners as well. And my family lives next door, and so I've started to create a more macro approach to the values I have, instead of having to make sure that I'm ticking these things off every day. Or, I used to keep a spreadsheet of first tier friends, second tier friends, family, all that. And I'd be like, okay, I need to make sure I say hi to this person every week. And I haven't talked to this person in a month. And instead of doing that, I just created the routines in my life and the habitation in my life such that I no longer needed these checklists. They just already exist in my natural daily schedule. The one thing that I do need to do is health, but I'm pretty good at waking up and making sure that the first couple hours of the day are dedicated to that, and the last couple hours of the day are dedicated to that. So I think that taking a macro approach has given me the space and time to be able to foster those values.
That's great. I'm a sucker and always really curious for people's routines. And you kind of alluded there, but you've lived in a city, you've lived up north, surrounded by nature. Can you kind of walk us through? Let's just take like a morning routine when you lived in downtown Toronto versus living up north. So let's start with Toronto.
Yeah, Toronto would have been wake up before the sunrise, go down to the shore at Humber Bay, Cherry Beach, Ashbridges Bay, meet a few friends, do a coffee over the fire. Well, fire was back in the COVID days when it was a little bit more Wild West. Now it's bring a coffee. Go for a plunge into the lake during the cold weather months. Catch up with some friends, and then from there, head to the gym, get my workout in, and then head home and probably do some red light. And then throughout the day, almost on the clock, I'd get up from my desk or wherever I was sitting, and I would probably take about 1,000 steps, walk around, get some sunlight, come back, sit down. And then in the evening, I'd probably go for a walk with Lisa, my partner, and then call it a day. That would be the in nature and movement schedule for Toronto. From north, it's going to sound way more like a biohacker junkie.
Well, that sounded pretty biohacker junkie. I'm not gonna lie. I'm already trying to figure out my routine around yours.
Yeah.
But okay, give us the full on Nick McNaught.
The full on. So the benefit of being up north is you have more space, and with more space, you can have more of a setup, and everything can be in one spot. So I'll wake up. We are very privileged to be able to live on the lake. So I get to walk about 100 feet, jump into a beautiful lake in Northern Ontario. From there, we have a sauna on the property. So I'll do a sauna, go back in the lake again. I have a red light and PEMF mat that I'll use to warm up on. So instead of using the sauna to warm up or any other method, I'll just warm up under the light and with the EMF mat. And then I'll take our dog Henry for a walk and typically get 5,000 steps. Then we come back, we take all our supplements, we have our bulletproof style coffee, get into work, and then we have the gym nearby. And we'll go to the gym, do a weight workout, come back, do another walk in nature. And these walks, the nice thing about being up north is every walk feels like you're out in the middle of the woods. So you're getting your nature, you're getting your sunlight, you're getting your grounding, and you're able to get the weights in, the hot and cold. And then in the evening, this is where it gets really biohacky. So Lisa has changed all of the lights in our house to be red lights as well. So at night, basically as soon as the sun goes down, it looks like our house belongs somewhere in Amsterdam because everything is a red glow, low circadian rhythm, just winding down and getting ready for bed. And then we'll be playing some sort of binaural beats in the background.
Well, sounds good. No wonder you get so much done. No, but I can really speak to the nature component from living in the city. When I think back, some of the best Impact Kitchen events we've ever done have been with you and the Stay Unbounded team, along the water there. You guys would have a sauna for us. The water would be at around -4 degrees and the fire's going off to the side, cowboy coffee or
Yeah.
broth with some parfait cups that you guys made up for us. Our team still talks about those sessions we did at Sunrise with you guys, and we continue to do. They're kind of one of the pillars now for our team, and I think getting in that nature, especially being in a city, is so important for one's well-being.
Yeah, I think it's paramount, especially as the city gets built up, and Toronto seems to be under construction permanently, and green spaces are hard to find. So you've got to be really active in the city to seek out those moments in nature.
I'm going to shift a little bit, and I want to talk about resilience. I read something that you wrote saying, resilience is more about becoming than returning. And I really resonated with that. It stuck with me. Maybe we can start off talking about what happened, 8 to 10 weeks ago, a pretty traumatic injury that you're working through now. And then I can pull back to maybe some moments in different phases of your life where resilience really came through for you and what you've learned.
Yeah. About 10 weeks ago, up at our cold camp retreat property, I was carrying a couple big cases of water, classic, trying to carry and do too many things at once, and took a big bail on a bunch of black ice going down a hill and fell on my right hip and ended up cracking the femur in 3 different places and tearing my glute at the attachment to the femur. And I've never experienced pain like that in my life. It was incredibly traumatic in that moment. And, I'm still working through that now, but the better part of a week I spent on a hospital bed in the ER, unable to move, completely immobile. And then the last 7 to 9 weeks, I've been relearning how to walk and move and heal those injuries. And I guess, I think it's kind of like it's been a bit of relearning how to walk and a bit of relearning how to live. And it's been net positive. When you talk about resilience, like, there was no pity party as much as I could afford it. There was certainly a few hours when it was happening where there was denial around how bad the injury would be, and some sorrow around like certain things that I'd have to accept I couldn't do for the next few months. Things would change, plans would have to be canceled, and my ideas of what life would look like for the next little bit were no longer what life was going to be. But very, very quickly, even by the end of that first day, gratitude and appreciation took over, and this has been what I would consider one of the better things to happen in my life in terms of how it's shaped my mindset going into my 40s and like creating a real inflection point in who I want to be and how I want to live life. And I think, I had my final x-rays this morning, got the all clear. And I actually had like a moment where like I turned and said like, thank you to the hospital for like the growth. Cause this has genuinely been a positive experience.
Well, congrats on that great news this morning. What a positive mindset. Can you speak a little bit? Like, I know your partner, Lisa, pretty well, and I'm assuming and guessing she's been this like great balance of, comforting, but then you mentioned there's been no pity party. I'm sure she's probably had to push you a little bit. Having a strong partner by your side throughout this, knowing that she was there from the beginning to where you're at now in this recovery, how has that helped you, have such a positive mindset with such a tough situation?
Yeah. She's an angel. Like, there's no way I could have gotten through this without her. Especially, the first 72 hours she didn't sleep. She advocated for me in the hospital. in ways I couldn't have done myself, or I don't even think anyone else could have. I won't go into our healthcare system, but the reason I don't have any metal in my leg right now is because of her and her advocating for me and her being a real champion. And also just her depth of knowledge on the human body and recovery. Before I could even think of something I needed, she had already gone and gotten it. And also done the research to say why I should try this exercise or take this supplement. It felt like I had my own personal physio. But to be honest, the pushing part, I think, came from me because she's right now, she's like, oh, are you sure you should be doing that? And I'm like, yeah, I'll push it. So I think.
Well, sled pushing, running to your car, you need someone to slow you down a little bit. So,
Yeah.
But Lisa, I do want to go paddleboarding with Nick as soon as possible. So hopefully we get
clear.
that in soon. Okay.
Yeah, we're clear to paddleboard.
Okay, so I know you're a lifelong entrepreneur, and resilience is part of being an entrepreneur. Maybe to start, like when did the entrepreneur journey start for you? Did you have a paper out as a kid? Were you selling things door to door? How did that start? And then kind of what was your kind of big, initial steps into entrepreneurship?
Yeah. I did have a paper route, but that was out of obligation. So that wasn't a self-directed business endeavor. I'm trying to think the first time that I would have had a real entrepreneur bone in my body. I think it was as a personal trainer. I had just finished university, and I was planning on going the route of being a lawyer. So I'd done the LSATs, done really well in the LSATs, and everything I'd been doing to that point. My dad was a lawyer, and I was like, oh, that seems like a great place to make money. And then when I thought about the process to becoming a lawyer, it didn't enthrall me. And I realized I was just trying to get to the end where I was like, well, lawyers make lots of money. And that actually wasn't enough of a drive for me. I wanted to do something where I loved the process. And I started working at Good Life Fitness, ironically.
Hey,
just to
shout
make
out
some
to
money.
Good Life.
Yeah, I know. As a customer service rep, and then as a personal trainer, and found out I was a pretty good trainer, and it was something that I got really passionate about and filled me with a lot of purpose. And 4 years in, I ended up starting my own personal training business. I think that was sort of the moment where I realized I'm fully capable of doing this on my own. I think I can actually do it better than the system I'm doing it within. I can provide a better service for people. And I had the confidence to do it. And so all that mixture at the right time came together, and I felt comfortable to go out and create my own business. Very quickly into that, I realized there was a bit of a gap in the market for how people were eating. This was before Uber Eats. This was before HelloFresh, all the things that exist now, even groceries, delivered to your door. This was back in the day when you had Weight Watchers and Meals on Wheels. And I think Impact was close, but not yet. This
What
was
year
in
was
2011.
Oh, it was still a thought in my head.
Okay,
then.
yeah.
We opened up at the end of 2015.
Yeah.
Well, you guys were a role model brand for me. You probably know that I was a personal trainer as well.
Yeah.
And so coming up in that space, seeing what Fuel Foods was achieving, the ambassadors you had and the celebrities eating your food was exciting. Tell me a little bit more about that journey.
Yeah, that I think would be the first real foray into entrepreneurship. I had a roster of personal training clients, and I realized that I was seeing them probably 3 times a week, and so I could help them make 3 informed decisions about their health throughout the week, and then they had 21 odd meal opportunities a week to go and screw it all up. which most of them were doing. And I was like, okay, so how do I control the other side of the equation where they're squandering their results in the gym by not eating properly? And at that time, I was doing fitness shows, wearing the banana hammock, getting all orange sprayed up and getting on stage. And so I was already preparing my own meals. And I went to a friend of mine that was working in a kitchen and asked, given these parameters around these different food items, could you create a healthy meal plan for my clients using these ingredients? And obviously being a chef, he was like, yeah, this is no problem whatsoever. We can just get creative. We created a menu, and I started with 5 of my clients, ordered 1 month up front, and that was my initial capital to start the business. And the end of that month, I had about 100 people on the service already because, this trainer got their client on it and their other client, and then this trainer came on board. And very quickly, we had like hundreds of meals going out weekly. And that quickly escalated to the largest food delivery business in Canada for prepared meals at the time. And as you mentioned, feeding celebrities and partnering with MLSE and all kinds of really cool adventures on that journey. And that business went for almost 9 years. So it ended in 2019. And, it didn't end the way I wanted it to. And I think that's been a real piece in the resilience journey for me. I guess you could call it was like my first pancake, my first go at business. And there were so many things I had no idea about, contracts and mergers, and all the parts of business that, like, as a business owner, when you're starting out, you don't really think about. You just think, hey, I have a great idea and I want to get this idea into people's hands and then make it profitable so that I can feed myself. And hopefully it's a great product that brings good value. And that's what you think about. But we ended up doing a merger at the end of 2018 that pretty much left me high and dry and had me forced out of the business. I ended up pursuing a lawsuit with my former partner and the new partner. And they drove it into the ground. And what was an incredible business that I felt very tight, almost like a firstborn sort of thing. I'm sure you can relate to how you feel about impact. It was run into the ground within 6 months, and then both of them fled to the US, and I sort of was left with the remnants of that business, a major tax debt, and sort of like my own grip on, my identity wrapped up in a business I dedicated the better part of a decade to. And then, was it my fault? What could I have done better? What am I going to do now? And sort of all that. So that was a real lesson in resilience around entrepreneurship and, now starting other businesses since how I approach those. I think, like everything else, we've talked about it, it was super painful at the time and incredibly difficult to go through, but has ultimately made me a much better entrepreneur now, a much wiser partner and a much better partner, and like unwilling to compromise on certain things that I think are important in the business and in the people I do business with.
Those are great learnings. I can relate to what you said around, your identity being in your business.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think that's a good thing. Sometimes I think it's not a good thing for the stage we're at. But kind of when you knew it was over, what was the process like of, having your identity go away to bringing it back? Like what did you kind of go through?
Yeah, I think that, the closing of the business, I had so much of my worth tied up in the business and my value tied up in the business that kind of reestablishing who I was and the value I brought outside of that was something I had to take a lot of time. And I think that with most stuff, my process has been to kind of like tear it all down and then start from the beginning. And so I spent a lot of time in nature, shocker. getting back to just who I was, void of anything, void of any sort of occupation, profession, monetary value, just a baseline who I was as a human, and reestablishing my values there, reestablishing my worth just as me with nothing unattached, and then reconnecting with people. And that is how the next business did start. Was there was a community business that we started called Novel Evenings, which was a book club / social events. And that formed just off of talking to people about the books I was reading. Following that, there's been Unbounded, which was sitting on the shores of Toronto, taking people for cold plunges one by one, and sitting by the fire and just talking about life and connecting with folks. So I think that I had to first unravel all of the parts that I thought I was in my previous business, get back to who I am, void of any of that attachment, and then connect with folks just as a human, and that's been, I guess, the recipe for me sort of building myself back up, is like brick by brick.
Community is a common thread in all your answers today, and that kind of takes us to the next Impact Kitchen value of impacting the community. Kind of as you've been speaking today, I've been curious about kind of similar to your entrepreneur journey, the community journey. And, I think back to that grade 12 Nick writing that T.S. Eliot quote. Was community important to you, in your younger years? And obviously it's been important to you to your entrepreneur journey, but I'd love to kind of hear that span of, what were you thinking about community in grade 12, Nick?
I think I didn't realize it. So I had a really difficult childhood. I had a great childhood. I had a really difficult childhood with fitting in. And I was the classic kid that I would consider myself festively plump and awkward. And I was in the gifted program, so I was smart, but then I was also athletic. So I wasn't accepted with the smart kids because I was also with the athletic kids, and then I wasn't accepted by the athletic kids. So I wasn't, because I was one of the gifted kids. And so I never really had a group or a community that I was accepted by. So I had to develop skills to be able to build my own. And so I got really good at being able to make friends with people because, grade 7 and 8, I have vivid memories of being chased home and bullied and beaten up, and kid running through the backyards and trying to escape from people. And so initially making friends and sort of finding my group was a way of survival. It was a way of me feeling safe, and being able to be okay. If people liked me, I was safe. And if I had friends around, then, I was going to make it. But that very quickly transitioned into just finding joy in connecting with the people I was becoming friends with and seeing the best in the friends that I was making. And so that has just been a theme throughout my life of, I didn't have brothers, so I would make lots of friends that I would consider to be brothers. I didn't have a group I could call my own was in high school, so I made groups. It was, it was like survival turned into just like a way of being, and what I think became like an automatic reaction to people coming into my sphere. I also wanted them to never experience what I think I had gone through. And so I always wanted people to feel seen, safe, and empowered when they were around me, and to genuinely feel like they were amongst someone that saw them for who they were.
I literally just thought you were explaining Unbounded. It's incredible because while you were talking about that, I think about how Unbounded started it, and maybe being one of the most organic businesses that I've seen started, in recent memory. take me back to, the first idea, the first plunges. I remember you inviting out small groups of friends to go on the lake. Many people thought you were kind of weird or crazy. But it was like slowly but surely, more and more people would show up. And it kind of just grew into what it's done today. But at least at the beginning, it definitely didn't feel strategic.
Oh, it was the first thing from strategic. Yeah. No, this has been I think I said earlier, brick by brick, genuinely like person by person, plunge by plunge, this business was built. Initially, it was just, we came back from the cottage. It's a seasonal property, so you have to leave there during the cold months. So we came back in November, and I remember I had been swimming late into the season and really enjoying the feeling. I didn't know all the science and education, all those pieces that I now do. I just knew how I was feeling when I would go for a cold swim and then I would get out, how that would make me feel alive, feel incredibly grateful, really present. I'd have awesome conversations with the people around me, and then I'd be really energized. And I was like, wow, this is something I'm like really enjoying. I'm going to put this as part of my routine, right? And I was like, what am I going to do when I get back to Toronto? I thought, well, I'm just going to go down to the shores and go for it. I'd never really done that in the winter. And I think, prior to Unbounded and the other communities that have now started up, no one was really in a culture of going down to the shores of Toronto to go cold bathing or go for
Yeah, it
like
was
a cold plunge.
what just the polar bear plunge on Jan
right.
1st.
Yeah.
Was it, I think.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, I'm going to just go down to the beach and go for a swim, I guess. And I remember the first one was at Cherry Beach, and built a little fire on the beach, made some coffee. I invited out 6 friends. Ron was one of them. We went for a swim, and I remember all of us coming out, and like the other 5 guys were just like eyes wide open, like what just happened? 2 of them went off immediately that didn't know each other and got coffee elsewhere and started chatting. People immediately connected and felt really good. And I think it was a perfect moment where, COVID had put people's social health, physical health, and mental health in some of the worst places it had been in probably their memory. And this was a perfect opportunity to improve all 3 of those areas. And all of those guys on that first day were like, we want to come back again and do this with you. When are you doing this again? Like, do you want to do this weekend? Oh, and can we bring a friend? And that was sort of that was where I realized, oh, there's a snowball here. Mm-hmm. And very quickly, plunge by plunge by plunge, more and more people started coming out till we had a pretty sizable community of people going down to Humber Bay and Cherry Beach. I remember we'd be getting up at 5 a.m. almost every morning to just go hang out with strangers and enjoy like a morning watching sunrise and cold plunging. And then sort of the moment where it switched from a community to a business was we were up at the cottage retreat that we run our cold camp out of in the north. And we were all plunging, and Ron and I got in the ice, and we, put a chessboard. We cut 2 holes in the ice. Queen's Gambit was very topical at this time. So we cut 2 holes in the ice, and we put the chessboard between the 2 holes, and we played a full game of chess, which was only about 6 minutes because I'm better than Ron. So, and we were playing fast. And a contractor that was working on one of the cabins happened to take a video of it. And Ron, of course, posted this video onto social media, and it went around the world in 15 minutes.
I remember that. Yeah.
MSNBC, Reuters, International Chess Federation, CTV, CNN, Huffington Post, BlogTO, every single outlet wrote about it and wanted to get in touch and have an interview about it. And this was a Thursday, and I looked at the rest of the people in the group. It was Ron, Lisa, myself, and Zach. And I said, there's an opportunity here where we could just be the people, the crazy Canadians that played chess in the ice and have 15 minutes. Or we could direct this attention to something a little bit more meaningful. And we all voted on it, and we all said, let's turn this into a brand. And so we pushed the interviews off to Friday, which bought us about 12 hours. And overnight, we came up with the name, we came up with the logo, we built a website, we created offerings on that website, and we came up with a full social media profile. And so by the time the interviews rolled around on Friday, I was able to say, and this is our brand, and this is why we do this. So there was kind of like this short, acute moment of need for evolution from community to brand. But up until that point, it had just been this massive organic building of person by person connection.
I love it. And, to see you guys go to thousands of people showing up at plunges, thousands of people showing up to your Sunrise socials. It's been a treat to be a small part of it, supplying our bone broth and, getting to be there. And actually, speaking of one of your Sunrise socials, I think it was the last one, in the midst of the chaos and, literally thousands of people, sauna, cold plunging, breath work, activations, you got on the mic and you spoke about wellness in terms of tools versus pillars. And it was hard to hear, but I was listening because it caught my attention, as I had never really thought of wellness as tools in maybe a constructive way, if I could put it. Mm-hmm. But could you elaborate a little bit about what you were saying that day and kind of what you meant by the difference between tools and principles?
Yeah, this is something I'm deeply passionate about, and I get caught in it all the time too, and I have to reel myself back. And I think, what I was talking about that day, and what I've continued to sort of preach about, is that we're great at commodifying wellness. We're really good at creating to-dos around it, workout routines, morning routines. I did my yoga class today. I got my 2,000 steps. I did some red light. I did a cold plunge. I did a sauna. Okay, I should be well. But the reality is that none of those things are actually wellness. Those are just tools that we have at our disposal to reinforce wellness. And wellness isn't any one of these tasks or activities. It's a principle. And what I think a lot of people do, and probably why a lot of people are continually why am I not feeling better? Is because they're trying to find wellness in the wrong place. And they're trying to find it at the end of I did my workout, I did this meditation, I did all these things, so I should be well. And the reality is that wellness is a principle where you practice self-compassion, where you establish your values and you live from those values. You exercise your power, you create boundaries, and then you use all of these tools to reinforce those principles. And so I think, people are lost doing the actions instead of creating the intention and the platform which those actions should be reinforcing. And so that there needs to be, a sort of a reframe of why are we going about doing all these things? We're human doings right now. We're not human beings. And we're off doing all this stuff and going in many different directions. And we're good at being busy, but we're not as great at creating the intention why we're doing all of this. And I think that's what I've been trying to bring people's attention to, is but why are you going to work out? But why, what's under that? Why do you want a sauna and cold plunge? What's the point of having that meditation if you're not creating the foundation it's reinforcing?
Yeah, it's an interesting mindset and something I toggle with as well, because, you think right now in a bigger picture societal way of, we have more access to knowledge, to all the wellness modalities that we could ramble off. But then it feels like we're also, less happy, more stressed, have more anxiety than maybe previously. And so it's there is a disconnect right now. And I think I agree with the word reframe of how one looks at wellness. I think that's interesting and, something that I look forward to hearing you talk more about, because it's just, I think, a bigger conversation right now in the wellness industry.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you could spend your life, well, you could be Brian Johnson, trying to find the end of what living the healthiest, longest life would be, but that's not going to make you happy. And you could fill every moment of every waking day doing something for your health. But if you don't know why you're doing it, then, there's no pot of gold at the end of that rainbow.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Nick, this is the Impact Community Podcast. So we've reached out to the Impact community for some rapid fire questions for you. So I got to go to my trusty piece of paper here. So these are not like one word answers, but think under a minute answers here. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So do you remember your first cold plunge?
Yes, I do. My first cold plunge ever would have been when I was probably 10 years old, and we were at the island for Easter, and we jumped into Lake Ontario and sat on a snowbank as a family.
That's great. All right. What's your secret to great abs?
Abs are made in the kitchen.
Okay. Well, great follow-up here, because it says, what's your favorite menu item at Impact Kitchen?
I had it today. The island jerk with grass-fed steak.
Nice. Okay, this one here, it says, I find breath work hard. What advice do you have for me to get started?
The easiest way to approach breath work would be to just start with breath awareness, just starting to notice your breath. There's a million different breath patterns that you can follow, but in order to sort of get curious about breath work and want to pursue breath work, if you're having a hard time getting started on it, starting to do really slow breath awareness and box breathing and noticing your exhales and noticing your inhales and the space in between and what that does in your body, and getting curious about that is a great place to at least create a foundation to then go into deeper breath work from.
Awesome. The favorite sauna you've ever been in?
Favorite sauna I've ever been in. The favorite sauna I've ever been in is on Galliano Island, just off the coast of Vancouver, on the side of a hill, built by a French pioneer, and it is one of the most beautiful outlooks you'll see of the West Coast, and it is the hottest sauna I've ever been in.
That sounds great. Okay, 3 tips to your 20-year-old self. Hot seat here.
3 tips to my 20-year-old self. It's not going to matter as much as you think it will. Chase purpose, not money. And enjoy the ride.
That's great. Okay, a couple more. What's one thing most people don't know about you?
One of my favorite activities to do is to puzzle.
All right, nice. That's great. Okay, your favorite book of all time?
The 5 People You Meet in Heaven.
What was your first job?
My first job was a cook at KFC.
Oh, that's crazy. All right, I won't go any deeper there. Okay, last one in the rapid fire is, who's someone who inspires you every day?
this is going to be like as cliche as it gets, but my mom, my mom inspires me every single day. She has one of the best attitudes I've ever seen about life, when it's going poorly or when it's going well. She's one of the best humans I know, and she loves and cares for everyone and lifts everyone up around her, beyond what I've seen anyone else do.
I love it. Great answers. Thank you for that. Okay, building for the future is Impact Kitchen's last value. And when I think of building for the future, the question I want to ask you is, I know you recently just turned 40. I like to reflect and think ahead in decades. And so if I asked you in your 30s, what were some of your biggest learnings and biggest wins? What comes to mind?
I think one of the biggest things for me was that I spent a lot of time in my 30s trying to figure it out, which didn't really get me any closer to figuring it out. But what did help was showing up and sort of committing to the process of it. And, now that I've got sort of some tailwinds behind me going into my 40s and some foundation, I think that showing up and that committing to the process piece is going to be paramount to see me through this chapter and having me find success. And that is one of those big learnings at the end of that decade, was that it wasn't about trying to get to the place. It was about sort of the process of doing that. That and, bring it back to everything we're doing is just so that we can be doing what we have already now. And that life moves fast, and time is the greatest asset, and you got to make the most of it.
Time is the greatest asset. So let's go ahead 10 years. You're 50 years old. We're doing this podcast again.
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking back between 40 and 50, what are some of the hopeful achievements in these next 10 years, or goals or ambitions that you have?
Great question. 10 years from now, professionally, I believe Unbounded will have projects in countries in Europe, Middle East, and across North America, working with partners. I think that we will have built a space here in Toronto, like if not also in New York, Austin, and LA. So I think that we will have a brick and mortar business or businesses, and that we will be working on the consulting, design, and event side in multiple continents, in multiple countries. On the personal side, I'll have a family.
Wow. Well, good luck in your 40s. That's a great decade.
Yeah.
So, Nick, I think that's a great kind of point to end it. I want to thank you again. I knew a lot about you before this conversation, but what I started off by saying, the type of human being you are, the principles that you lead your life by, the way you lead others, I think has been, just reinforced through this conversation. I couldn't be more proud to have you as a friend and an Impact Ambassador. And I'm excited to see your journey continue on. And, I mean it when I say I hope we're sitting here again in the future talking about, many of these things that you discussed today. So thanks for being our first guest on the Impact Community Podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, man. Thank you for having me, and being a part of Impact and the brand has been, it's been a real blessing. I think what you do and what your team does and what your brand stands for and how you make everyone around you feel is second to none.
Thanks, Nick.